Rejoice, friends, for Rings of Power is finally over, and someone caught Gandalf and I celebrating. After a grueling viewing of the final 5 episodes, I have this to say to the showrunners.
Go fuck yourself.
I put up a poll recently that asked which show was worse, She-Hulk or Rings of Power. The results weren't very shocking. Out of about 3,000 votes, 71% said She-Hulk took the crown. But I'll raise you this. She-Hulk might be objectively bad, but because of the legacy behind Lord of the Rings of Power is far more insulting.
And therefore,
it might actually be worse than She-Her Hulk. This video actually might have come out earlier if it didn't take me 4 days to watch the last 5 episodes of this monstrosity. My previous video reviewed episodes 1 through 3, so I sat down one evening with the intent to binge the final 5. Yes, watching a show to review it basically doubles the runtime because I'm taking notes, and I thought I was mentally prepared for the endeavor. Turns out it took me 4 hours to watch episode 4 alone, and that's when I realized I was in for a ride through hell. I originally planned on making a single 1-hour video, but after I completed it, I realized it felt like it was better suited being split into 2. While the second half is a review of each remaining episode, man, do I have some shit to say first. The Rings of Power is a literal chore to get through. The story is like molasses. It's slower than 1900s social justice reform. At its very best, the show's better than Anesthesia. At its worst, it's poorly acted with cringe-inducing dialogue, where there are already YouTube videos galore compiling the top 10 favorite cringe lines from the show, filled with embarrassingly written and horrendously delivered metaphors and faux poetry.
You've always said sandstone in your granite as far as the elves were concerned.
I will not be made a prisoner.
I would sooner kneecap a stallion than seek to imprison the mighty commander of the Northern Army.
We can return in force and sweep the enemy from these lands like salt from a table.
The sea is always right!
the sea is always right!
This line led me to third-party embarrassment, and for whatever reason, I gave the show some credit that maybe this would pay off later. Turns out, no, it doesn't. It's just a thing they say. Just a line to try and sound profound while being inescapably cheesy. Going from shredded mozzarella to an entire cheddar wheel once you realize it ultimately leads nowhere and fast. And don't forget this epic banger.
Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
What the fuck?
Characters are constantly saying things that completely contradict their previous actions, and the only explanation I can come up with is because the writers think the lines sound good or the plot needs them to say X when they should be saying Y. A perfect example of this is in the finale, when Strong Woman confronts Chad about a piece of parchment that leads her to believe he isn't who he says he is. That he's not the long-lost king of the Southlands because the line had been broken. He pulls a "aw shit you got me" when he could easily just lie. Maybe the line was broken and there was an illegitimate child. Maybe it was kept a secret for whatever reason. But nah, fuck it. We need to hurry up and deliver something to the audience, so we'll just have Sauron give it up faster than an 80s rock band groupie. Characters instantly become complete dipshits and are dumbfounded by the simplest things to make another character look more intelligent. For example, take not Sauron telling Celebrimbor about mixing ores together. Celebrimbor's a fucking master craftsman, and when he's talking to not Sauron about needing to amplify the power of Mithril, not Sauron suggests some ores just might do that, and Celebrimbor is absolutely fucking flabbergasted by the most obvious and basic suggestion ever uttered. It's just fucking god-tier level writing. And Rings of Power is a production that relies on mystery boxes to hide its non-existent story. Which makes sense considering the showrunners are disciples of Jar Jar Abrams himself, the man responsible for the show Lost, a show that ran entirely off of the mystery box MacGuffin style of storytelling.
What is the Black Rock?
What do the numbers mean?
What is the monster?
Who are you people?
That bird just say my name?
What is a Nigerian priest doing in an island in the South Pacific?
What happens to pregnant women on this island?
And ultimately becoming a massive disappointment after it ended when audiences realized the mystery was far more alluring than the answers. Unfortunately for Rings of Power, there isn't much actual mystery or intrigue here because you'd be hard-pressed not to figure things out instantly. Or even worse, the mystery boxes presented aren't interesting enough for you to care about. The entire season hinges on the hope the audience will get excited over trying to figure out who's Sauron. If you didn't guess it was this guy by episode 4 at the latest, you are the target audience for this show. Or who's Gandalf 2.0? Hint, it's Gandalf. Who's Feminem? Surprise, who knows? Who cares? Because this plotline goes nowhere fast. Or who's Orc Daddy?
Update! Apparently nobody gives a shit, so fuck 'em!
Or why is the elven tree dying? Hint, there's no reason given other than it just happens because that's what the writers need to happen. Or why is Durin's dad such a fucking dickhead? Hint, because the plot needs him to be. Or the story's actually trying to make us question if the person who ultimately defeats Sauron is alive or not.
I'll just go fuck myself.
Considering how little the show gives a shit about following the lore, though, I guess he could be dead. I gave the show the benefit of the doubt that the stranger couldn't possibly be Gandalf, because that's a little too fucking obvious. But then he was. Pretty sure making the audience think you're not that uncreative and then showing us that you are isn't the kind of subversion of expectations you want to go for, but okay. The show doesn't just rely on mystery boxes, it's wrapped entirely in contrived storytelling techniques that amplify a lack of creativity. Like the tree dying that's killing the elves. It's dying because, well, that's just what needs to happen, okay? Or the benefit of the doubt I gave the show all the way to episode 8 that when Galadriel first ran into Chad, it wasn't just a bullshit contrived way to get them together. Turns out, it really was. Galadriel jumped into the ocean, and while swimming in thousands of miles of water, didn't just run into a random raft, but a raft carrying fucking Sauron himself. And both of them run into one ship that just so happened to be passing by them. And in a world filled with hostile people, the ship is being charted by folks nice enough to take them aboard, who luckily live in a land run by a pushover, so Galadriel can bully her way into acquiring their fucking army to go do what she wants to do. How lucky all this happened. It's like everything just fell into place.
A man and an elf, together. Circumstances arose.
We are companions by chance.
When you sit back and realize the sheer luck involved in all this, the story starts to sink like the fucking Titanic. The show tries to spread this out over 9 hours, in hopes to hide all this, but once you reach the end, you realize how fucking contrived it all is. And you had to be bored to death for the length of 3 movies just to realize it in the end. About 8.5 hours in, and the only thing that happens is some characters get introduced, a fight happens, and Mordor gets created thanks to the most contrived and idiotic Rube Goldberg device you can imagine. Turn a key and the mountain goes boom.
Go fuck yourself.
This is from the perspective of someone looking at it minus the desecration of the lore, too. The Rings of Power simply does not work as a coherent narrative that stands on its own. If you threw out all the offensive liberties it takes with Tolkien's work, it's a steaming pile of shit all the same.
I haven't really thought about this until now, but they have this big confrontation and conversation in the pilot, and then that conversation is sort of mirrored.
I saw that.
Cool, great. I'm glad. I don't think I did until just now.
In this interview, the showrunners admit to the fact that they don't even have the answers to their own mystery boxes yet. They just set it up with the hopes that they'll figure out the payoff later. Or worse, that they'll pull a Zack Snyder, let people speculate and come up with ideas, and if a reasonable answer pops up, they'll say, oh yeah, that's totally what we were doing. This interview contradicts interviews they've given prior to the release of the series, and they're clearly lying about the fact that they have the entire series planned out. They don't. At this point in time, all these contrivances were really conceived as pure luck within the context of the story. They could retcon this drivel in the future, but I'll bet $1 and a handshake they don't even bother if they get past the 2nd season. Rings of Power is incredibly hollow, and there's a reason why the majority of positive reviews have stuck to talking about how visually stunning the show is, rather than complimenting or touching on the story as a strength. In fact, now that the show's over, the access media seems to be turning on it. Or, you could also say, finally telling the truth about it. Even if it lacks visuals, a compelling story can make endearing television. It's why a show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer is still held in such high esteem, despite it not holding up visually. And did it even look good in the 90s? And we don't have to look very far away from the Rings of Power to understand why Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, the trilogy this series so desperately wishes it was, to find something that holds up to this day in no small part because of how beloved and cherished the interpretations of Tolkien's characters are. Digital effects can be incredible tools, and I'd be a fool to suggest it takes anything but obscene talent, dedication, and hard work. So I am by no means trying to diminish the artistic merits of the people who gave it their all, bringing a beautiful aesthetic to this show. But a beautiful picture will never make up for a lack of depth in the writing. I mean, honestly, the show is between a rock and a hard place. They wanted a Lord of the Rings show, but don't have the rights to anything other than some pages from the appendices and the Lord of the Rings novels themselves. So what to do? The showrunners aren't good enough to write original content, obviously. Otherwise, Amazon wouldn't have purchased this IP to sell this product. So they write themselves into a corner trying to appeal the fans of the films aesthetically, or just lifting lines directly from characters that will be speaking the same words thousands of years in this story's future, all for a little hint of nostalgia.
Give it to us, raw and wriggling.
Give me the meat and give it to me raw.
It's enlisting the hope of nostalgia to get you through the day, because another flaw of this show is the constant use of member berries. I've heard this argument a few times.
Wow, really weird that the show uses things that are related to Middle-earth.
If that's what you take away from the member berry criticism, then yeah, this show is definitely for you. And I bet The Force Awakens is your favorite Star Wars movie. Much like that half-assed film was eventually realized as nothing but smoke and mirrors, basically a New Hope all over again, this show in a lot of ways tries to be Lord of the Rings because it wants to be Lord of the Rings. How do we retell a lot of the same story without retelling it? How much can we get away with rehashing that story again? We live in a world of soft reboots and nostalgia-bait movies, and hopefully this era of film is coming to an end soon because it's getting fucking sickening, relying on the good times of people's past instead of making something new and fresh.
Oh, Jurassic World is so good. They brought the T-Rex back. Remember the T-Rex? Oh my god, I love the T-Rex. Remember Jeff Goldblum? Oh my god, I remember Jeff Goldblum. He was fantastic.
I criticized the quick visual of Ents in episode 1 in my last video, and for good reason. They weren't anywhere to be found in the rest of the season. They were there strictly for the member berries. The showrunners have even opened up and admitted that for season 2, they'll try and give viewers what they were expecting out of season 1. And my question is, why didn't you do that in the first place? World building, I'm sure, is the primary excuse. With the showrunners constantly playing defense and making excuses for the mistakes of season 1, it really paints a beautiful portrait of how sad it is that people are defending the show as some sort of masterpiece. If this is peak television, art is fucking doomed. There are plenty of shows and movies that do world building while still giving us actively engaging, likable characters that we can get invested in. Speaking of characters, a simple story can sometimes be elevated by our love of the characters. That doesn't apply here. The characters of Rings of Power are sometimes shitty versions of beloved ones from Tolkien's work, other times completely made up and seem to exist solely because reasons. I'm talking specifically about Discount Legolas in Little House on the Patriarchy, whose stories add a total of 0 to the overall plot in the end, relegated to simply eating up screen time and padding in some action scenes, as well as an excuse to have the Hollywood requirement of a stunning and brave female character. Either way, almost every character comes off as flat. Their story, their motivations are often shaky, and the acting itself is flatter than the guard in Austin Powers.
Watch out! Watch out!
I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the actors. This seems a lot more like a direction and writing issue. Too often, the actors seem to not know how to handle a scene. They often play it as pure melodrama, but it comes off like a high school play and ends up being about as compelling as 8 hours of C-SPAN. The harshest of all realizations is that our main character Galadriel is the worst out of every character. I don't think I've ever watched a show where I've disliked a protagonist more. Shit, at least with She-Her-Hulk, Tatiana Maslany's a good actress. I didn't like her character, but she had some charm about her. Morfydd Clark has enough range to challenge Tessa Thompson for the least amount of facial expressions possible. And the 2 times I can think of where she isn't looking like a fucking robot, it comes off goofy as fuck and just plain cringe-inducing.
They'll die because of me!
The writers fall into the trap that most modern shows do, trying to force us as an audience to accept and like a character that they don't even try to make likable in any way. Instead, she's pushy at her lowest moments and hilariously over-the-top angry in others. She's manipulative and convinces people to do things that ultimately lead to their downfall or ends up getting them hurt. She threatens people that have been nothing but good to her. She leaves her own people for dead for her own selfish reasons, then questions why they would abandon her as if that's some sort of fucking mystery, and looks down at others for doing the exact same thing she's done.
Commander! Wait, no! We keep moving!
I am simply wondering what manner of man would so readily abandon his companions to death.
She's responsible for bringing the Dark Lord Sauron himself back to Middle-earth. Yet somehow this fucking wench fails upward and ends the season acquiring one of the 3 elven rings of power. She's the Middle-earth equivalent of Scarlet Witch after she enslaved an entire town.
This will be your only warning.
Stay out of my home.
But we're apparently supposed to feel sympathy for her when she decides to stop being a selfish, manipulative, horrible human being.
If you won't let us go, just let us die.
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
As always, the problems can be traced back to the writing. It's all about the writing. A character's only as smart or clever as the writer. The way Galadriel's portrayed is just the biggest offender of a running theme throughout the show, of characters experiencing consequences that seem simply illogical at best. She bullies people into submission or threatens people that saved her, yet basically gets rewarded for it, while someone like Isildur gets punished because one time he let go of a fucking rope on a ship.
I let it slip.
That was deliberate. You're off the sea guard!
Characters are constantly reaping consequences that the writers need them to experience, rather than consequences that would naturally happen to them. Also known as and-then storytelling. The writer needs X to happen, so instead of finding a natural way to get there, they just force things into existence because, let's face it, it's the easy way out. The one bright spot of the show is the relationship between Durin and Elrond, and even that is often overshadowed by idiotic plot devices and the often embarrassing dialogue.
The dog may bark at the moon, but he cannot bring it down.
Even though the guy looks like Dr. Oz, I can honestly say I enjoyed whoever this actor's take is on Elrond, and the actor playing Durin does a great job. Not good enough to make up for all the faults of everything around him, but the guy at least has plenty of range, and was the reason there's a single scene of the show where I felt something other than apathy. Their friendship is the only thing I liked about this entire show. They were the only characters who played well off each other, and had a few moments of levity in an otherwise paltry, ham-fisted melodrama. If there was one part of this show that was a reminder of Peter Jackson's film trilogy that was done positively, instead of eliciting disdain for daring and failing to emulate it, this was it. Amazon started this whole debacle because they wanted a pop culture encompassing show to expand their streaming empire, but apparently couldn't find an original idea to save its life. So like a pop star who can't make a hit by themselves, they decided to purchase the Lord of the Rings name for an obscene amount of money.
After Amazon got involved in this project, my son came up to me and he said, "Dad, please don't F this up." Oops!
Now, I understand that Hollywood's a business, but the thing about adapting something like Lord of the Rings is that it's going to come with a lot of expectations. A lot more than adapting a superhero into film, and a lot more than, well, almost anything I can think of. It's so beloved that there needs to be true artistic merit behind every facet of it. Like most people, I obsessively watched the appendices of the DVD extras when the Lord of the Rings extended editions came out back in the day, and I fondly recall how lovingly crafted those movies were and the respect Jackson put into them. He didn't want to do anything that wasn't necessary. Yes, liberties were taken to change the story at times when he didn't think it could necessarily translate well over to film, but without a doubt, the heart and soul of Tolkien was there. The films didn't just hold monetary value, there's artistic merit to them, made with the desire to really adapt a work of art into its own work of art. That's why they're considered some of the best films ever made. The Rings of Power, on the other hand, exists solely for the sake of making money for Amazon. And not only that, but making money for Amazon off of the Lord of the Rings IP because they couldn't come up with an original fantasy series to call their own. It doesn't exist to add anything to or flesh out Tolkien's world via film, or they would have gone full force in trying to purchase the rights to the Silmarillion. This series exists to maintain and gain new subscribers to their streaming service, and only for that purpose. Fuck integrity, it only focuses on the monetary merit. Thing is, Amazon wanted to have their cake and eat it too, but without putting the work in where it mattered in order to get there and still expecting people to praise it like they had. Did they go out of their way to make a bad show? I'd never suggest that, but they put their focus in the wrong area. Amazon surely wanted Rings of Power to be a cultural moment on par with Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad.
Now, say my name.
Heisenberg.
Goddamn right.
But you have not seen what I have seen.
I have seen my share.
You have not seen what I have seen.
And when they didn't, I find articles like this. Rings of Power is not a water cooler show, and that's okay. An unbelievable excuse, because there's no way they wanted a mid-as-fuck TV show. That's just what they produced. They wanted this show to be talked about, to be analyzed positively, and have people buzzing every week in excitement. You don't spend $1 billion with the intent to produce mediocrity, but once you've realized you've made a mistake, what's the best thing to do to get people talking? Make fucking excuses, point fingers, and blame others to stir the pot. And who better to blame than the fans? Unless Season 2 has the ultimate turnaround, this show will live on only as a piece of controversy, and one stirred completely by the company and showrunners who produced it. Judging by how late in the game they finally started releasing any trailers, photos, or details about the show, and now that I've seen the entire thing, it's safe to say they knew they had a turd on their hands. A recent article begged the question of why Keyboard Warriors can't admit the show, along with She-Hulk, is a success both commercially and critically. If you ask defenders of the show, it's a borderline masterpiece, the peak of programming.
Thank you so much. You guys have created a masterpiece.
Oh my God, stop.
Too hyperbolic, but honestly, I appreciate this show even more the second watch through.
When you hide the viewership numbers once they start to dwindle, and hide any negative feedback about the show and then criticize your own fans, I'm pretty sure that answers the question right there, because it's neither. Those damn fans who speak negatively about the show are so toxic. Not like the fans who love the show. Like defenders of the show popping up in my comment section in my last Rings of Power video. They're understanding, accept criticism, and are never rude at all. The thing about art is it simply speaks for itself. If the show was good, they wouldn't need to defend it so vehemently, because the negative voices would be drowned out. You wouldn't have to block negative reviews, use ist or ism words to describe anyone who dare criticize the show, and you wouldn't have to literally call people who have a negative opinion of it patently evil. In that article, they were vague in who exactly they were describing when hurling that, which in turn painted everyone with a bad critique of the show as literally fucking evil. I've never seen anything like this. Oh wait. Yes, I have. As has been pointed out by the likes of Critical Drinker, Mahler, and others, fan baiting is a real thing and it's out in full force with this show. How to get people talking about something that no one is actually excited for? Just tell them that they didn't like the show because a person of a different race was starring in it, or that it has a female lead. That'll certainly get people talking, and any publicity is good publicity, right? Media companies have done an incredible job finding new ways to get people buzzing about a show, and it feeds right into the social media cultural movement of the last decade and a half. Who cares if people hate watch a show? At least they're watching it, and you can simply block their reviews of it, make it look like people adore it at a glance, and then take out articles and media outlets that continue stirring that cultural pot. It's brilliant stuff. Unfortunately for them, they're left with a show that fails regardless of whatever they think the fans dislike it for. No one fucking cares that there's black elves or that there's a woman protagonist. What we care about is the fact that the show is written like a fucking high school student did it. Fan fiction is at least written by people who have a genuine love for the intellectual property. Rings of Power seems like it was written by people who think they can improve on something that's already beloved. As if they're saying, yeah, it's good, but times have changed and we're here to fix it. Sorry, but mystery box storytelling, cringe-inducing dialogue, a plot that relies on pure luck and convenience, and CGI that ranges from great to oddly shitty isn't improving on something that's already considered a masterpiece. I criticize the bejesus out of She-Hulk writers, but after the staunch defense they put up while calling critics of the show patently evil, I can plainly say this to the showrunners of Rings of Power.
Get fucked! Thank you.
Now, the only thing left to do is review the final 5 episodes, and that video is just about wrapped up and should be released shortly after this one, and that'll be filled with general musings and observations that go along with the overall critique you just heard. That video should hopefully be following up in about a week or so, as long as it can get past YouTube's copyright claims. Once that's out, consider this my own Lord of the Rings trilogy. Till then, GG's gents.